Hi guys, this is Mark. In this video I'd like to demonstrate a technique that you could use to enable autocomplete in your applications. For the user interface I'm going to use Dropsource because it makes it super simple to build an app without any coding, and I will wire it up to a backend which is Backendless, of course. And the key here will be to demonstrate how I could actually use Backendless API to retrieve data specifically for the autocomplete feature. Before we start delving into the actual technique and the mechanics of how this works, let me demonstrate the actual app to you. So I'm going to use the simulator that is available on the Dropsource side. The application is trivially simple. All it does and all it has is a text field that allows me to enter a city name. So here, if I start typing New York, well, here it's just new, you can see that all these suggestions are being pulled back from the backend. And as I modify the value in the text field, all the suggestions are modified accordingly. So here, if I start typing like TAS, you can see that all these cities are being pulled back. And if I search for Dallas and start typing DA, you can see that it also provides a bunch of suggestions that match whatever I typed in. The database itself contains about 12,000 cities, and I will show you how I populated the database. But the cool thing about it is, this is a very effective technique that gives you an ability to implement this in your application, whether you use Dropsource or building a client application with code. So I'm going to exit this right here, and let's switch to Backendless populated with a database, and then I will show you how this client application actually uses the API to implement the autocomplete. So here I'm going to create a brand new app. I'm going to call it Autocomplete, which is going to be completely brand new blank backend without any data in it. And of course there is nothing in the database, and we will need to bring all this data into here. To find the data on the internet, what I did is I just typed in world cities CSV. And the very first link that Google provides is a world cities database. In here you can get a zip file. So if you download, you get a zip file with a CSV that contains all the cities. So here, if you go back to Backendless, under Manage and then Import, you will find these buttons. So we can import a single CSV, which will become a data table using this particular Browse button. So click Browse and then locate the folder that you get from the zip. I already expanded it, so here we select the CSV. This is exactly as it comes from that website, and then click Open and then click Import. So Backendless looks through the structure and then gives you an ability to specify the data types for individual columns. So for the latitude, and we have latitude and longitude, we're going to select double, and we're also going to select double for population. In fact, for population we can select integer, and then for ID we could also select integer. Everything else can be a string. So click Finalize Import. Backendless is processing the CSV, and it actually creates this data in the database as we speak. So here you will see world cities now already around 4,000 objects that are being inserted. An email is going to be sent to you when the processing is complete, but you can also go to Files and then select Import, and then this is the log that is being created. You can view this log by clicking this icon, and then when you scroll to the very bottom, if the processing is complete, it will say importing finished. So we can always go back to data. And now we see that the table contains around roughly 11,000 objects. In fact, it is 11,276 to be precise. So all the data from CSV is now in the Backendless database, and it is fully searchable. So how does searching with autocomplete works? Well, we're going to be searching by city name because that's what users type in that text field, and the search parameter, which in Backendless we call where clause, would need to use a partial search. So here, to test it out, what you can do is you type in the name of the column, then the keyword like, and then you have to start whatever the user starts typing, and let's say it's going to be DA for Dallas, and then you put the percent sign and then close the quote. So in here, any city that starts with DA is going to be found by Backendless. So if you'd add another letter, then it will rerun the search. So now it's any city that starts with DAL. So the trick here is whenever users type in letters they start, or whenever they modify that field, whatever that field contains, you need to run a query with this where clause that it's shown here, granted that instead of DAL, it's going to be the value that is typed into the text field, followed by the percent sign using the like keyword, and then Backendless will return all the objects that match that particular query. And in fact, you can actually test it using REST console. So if you go to REST console, type in the where section, type in that query, click get. So this is going to be exactly the actual request and the response that you will be getting in your application. You can play with the number of matches without specifying the page size. It's going to be 10, but if you want to start getting more matches, just specify how many you want, up to 100 in the page size. So click get, and then here you will be getting more data back from Backendless with respect to the page size. Now, the question is, how do you bring this API into Dropsource? For this, you will need to use the Generate API Docs link that is also available on REST console. Click the Generate API Docs. The Open API Swagger 2.0 is automatically selected. Click Generate and then copy this link right here that you get into the clipboard, and that's the URL you will need to use to import into Dropsource. In my case, I have already done this, but let me demonstrate this for you. So here, to import the API into Dropsource, you will have this tab right here called API, and there's going to be this big plus icon button. Click on it and you'll get this this form. In the Enter API spec URL field, just paste the URL, click Add, and then the API is going to be imported into the Dropsource application. So here is going to be a copy of the same API. I'm going to delete it now because we don't want to have a replica of exactly the same API. However, once it is added, in this case, what you need to select is the following route that is called get/data and then slash the name of the table. In this case, it's called world cities. So you will just select that particular route and then click add, and you will get this line right here. And then inside of this API, so basically click on it, and in the parameters you will need to select query, and in the query section you will need to configure the where parameter, and then that where parameter is going to be the actual where clause. But the question is, how do you create that where clause, because it needs to be dynamic. And as you can see in here, in this where clause, it actually uses a page variable called search query. So let me show you how I put together this search query. And the answer to this question is going to be right in this field where the user types in the city name. And in fact, if I go to the properties for the text field, you will see section events, and in the events there is an event called value changed. And of course, before you do this, you need to declare the actual page variable, and the page variables are going to be available right here. The page is selected. On this tab, page variables, click on it and declare a page variable that will contain your search query, and it should be of the string type. Now, going back to the value changed event for your text field, click manage, and in here there is some logic, and the very first thing that I do is I check if that field contains any data. In fact, you see that the length of the text field, if it is 0, then what I do is I hide the actual table that contains the matches, just so the behavior is dynamic. In other words, if the user has used the backspace to delete all the content, the matches table needs to go away. If otherwise it contains any data, then we start the manipulation of creating that actual search query. And the very first thing that I do is, in this case, I make the actual table visible. In fact, the placement of this set value could be done right after we run the API request. But anyway, so we make this table with the search results visible, and then we use this append to a string action. And in this case, we basically take the static value, which is city, like, and then the single apostrophe, and we append to it whatever user typed in at that point into the text field. So now it becomes city, like, single apostrophe, and then some value like DAL. And then after that, in the second append to string, we append %. Remember, we had this where clause, in fact, right here. So it's city, like, apostrophe, then whatever user typed in, then %, and then the single apostrophe to close this. And this is exactly what we do, is we're adding the % and a single apostrophe. And whatever the result of this concatenation, we set it into the page variable, into the search query. And now the search query contains the entire where clause, and we run the API request to get all the cities with that specific where clause. Whatever comes back is going to be the result of the API request. In fact, in the responses, notice that we have data binding for the data source. And the data source is bound to the actual table list that at this point I have hidden just so it doesn't display by default. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it visible. In fact, I have selected it here, and let me scroll, and now it is visible. So what happens is this data source is actually bound to the entire table, and a table, and it is configured to be dynamic, and you can actually see it in here. See, table view, the content is dynamic, and I also have table view cell that contains a single label. Now this label, what I could have done is I could have just mapped city to the label. In this case, it would display all the matches, but I wanted to be a little bit more creative, if you will, to display both city and the country. So the way I implemented this is, in fact, if you select table view cell, in the events for this table view cell, there is a cell loaded event. And notice that in the cell loaded, I'm doing some additional concatenation. So I'm taking the value of the city, I'm appending the comma, and then to the result of this action, I'm appending country. And then once it is done, I'm taking the value of this concatenation and I'm appending it to the label's text. As a result, whenever I run the search, this list will display city, comma, country. So in fact, let me run it one more time just so you can see the actual effect of how it works. So there are 3 Dallases because apparently there are 3 Dallases in different states in the United States. But if you start searching for Paris, you will see that all the matches that start with P-A-R-I. But anyway, the result here is that we have both city and the country. So hopefully this was helpful for you, and you can start implementing autocomplete with Backendless with your Dropsource applications, or if you're building with code, with your native apps which use code. Thank you, and as always, happy codeless coding.